Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
AI has already delivered impressive gains, from streamlining back-office operations to powering conversational assistants. But agentic AI is a whole new frontier. These systems don't just respond, they act. They make decisions, they take initiative, and operate on behalf of users with a level of autonomy that could fundamentally reshape how banks and financial institutions serve their customers. But what's still missing? What barriers are holding us back? And most importantly, what needs to happen for agentic AI to deliver real value for both customers and institutions? I'm David Barton-Grimley, and on today's FinTech Insider Insights, we're partnering with Gradient Labs, who recently worked with a major UK bank to implement agentic AI in a way that transformed, not just automated, critical customer interactions. We'll also look at how innovators like Klarna are setting the pace and explore the major challenges around ownership, regulation, and trust. So, is agentic AI the future of customer experience, or just the latest tech buzzword? Let's find out. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of experts who know the space inside and out. Let's dive in. So firstly, we have someone who is very familiar with the case study from Gradient Labs, their CEO, Dimitri Massin, CEO of Gradient Labs. Welcome, Dimitri. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role at Gradient Labs?
Cool. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you. Yes, I'm Dimitri. I'm the CEO of Gradient Labs, where we work with financial institutions to really automate any types of manual, repetitive tasks that there might be in customer operations in particular. So we have built a collections of AI agents that do that work and in a fully autonomous and safe fashion. So really, we started kind of from customer support experiences, which is kind of the easier tasks, and now expanding more and more into back office and specialist support operations. Yeah, that's us.
Awesome. Great intro, and welcome on, Dimitri. And joining Dimitri, we have Tim Elder, Chief Product Officer at Multiply. Welcome to the show, Tim. Can you tell us a little bit more about Multiply and their role in the AI space?
Sure. Thanks for having me, David. Very happy to be here. I'm Tim, Chief Product Officer at Multiply. And at Multiply, we are making financial advice accessible to everyone. And when I say financial advice, I talk about that in terms of it's a form of financial intelligence that is regulated. And so financial advice looks like being able to tell someone specifically about what they should do with their money, be it opening a product or using a product, financial product in a particular way. And historically, that's been done by human advisors, so highly qualified human advisors in this regulated space. And because it's been driven by humans, it means that the people who consume financial advice tend to be, well, basically it's not mass consumer. There's a cost associated with that advice. So our technology is really helping make financial advice accessible to everyone, make it a mass consumer service. And we're doing that in two ways. One is helping people that give advice today, humans that give advice today, become hyper efficient. And the second way we're doing that is provisioning our technology for scaled, automated, personalized financial advice. So that means you can use our systems to give advice, end-to-end advice, on a fully automated basis, which is quite exciting. So our tech looks like deterministic advice engine and risk engines, like working in parallel, some modeling tools. But what where we are today is that's been provisioned in a way for agentic use. So we're super excited about agentic use, super excited about LLMs because, one of the things that human advisors have been really great at is talking human to human, using language and translating that into a financial plan. And that's where we are today. We're in a really exciting place where people are beginning to use LLMs to kind of talk about their finances in their own terms and use our systems to get a financial plan.
Awesome. Welcome on board. And completing our lineup, we have Aditi Subbarao, Strategic Partnerships Lead at Instabase. Welcome back to the show, Aditi. Tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to since we last spoke.
Great to be back, David. Thank you for having me. It has been a busy time indeed. So with all of the recent developments in the AI space, as always, the almost acceleration of agentic development and adoption, we have been kept on our toes quite so much. But interestingly, most of what we're working on is what you could almost term as backstage work, in the sense of not really building the end applications or the final agents, but more so in the data layer where we're helping our clients develop the infrastructure and the foundations to develop, adopt, and also distribute these agents in a truly enterprise format across those organizations. So not as glossy, but definitely very critical work that has been keeping us awake.
But that's actually very interesting. A great intro and also a wonderful segue, Aditi, into the first part of the podcast, where actually really one of the first questions that I'm going to pose for all of you is, where are we with agentic AI? What kind of is that pulse check, that status? And maybe just to recap what each of you said in your intros and also what I said at the beginning, there is absolutely a distinction between the broader technology of generative AI and its ability to compile and manipulate and assemble knowledge and all of that wonderful stuff, which I think we all know, but also agentic specifically, which is what we're talking about here, which is the ability for a degree of autonomy for action away from humans. So, Dimitri, I'm going to come to you first. Like, where is it today? What is the status? I suppose that's quite a broad question of agentic AI today.
Yeah. I think there's certainly a lot of noise and hype around that area. I'm sure all of us are aware. So it's kind of hard to distinguish really, like, is it a hype? Is it a bubble? Is it internet 2.0 type of thing? I don't believe so. And I think what I'm seeing from the trenches in particular is that we have crossed with agentic AI, we have crossed a very important milestone. And that milestone is that we have actually already seen use cases which are proving to be very, very valuable in enterprises and in companies. And so kind of seeing inside out is just a matter of time now. So it's not the question of if this will ever be useful or transformational. We've seen those cases already. It's just a matter of how quickly companies will adopt it. And I think that would be the summary of what I'm seeing right now.
That's really interesting. So is it a little bit like what Aditi was saying, is that people are beginning to sort of prepare those back-end systems, the sort of data operations and everything to prepare for that kind of agentic future?
As well, there's a lot of that happening for sure. It's just every company operates at different paces, right? So I've seen companies that have implemented that already, but very, very few, but very successfully. So that shows us that it's possible and there's a lot of value. But most companies I'm talking about are much further behind. They're creating first policies and like which models can they use and not, and how, and like how do they get it through compliance and whatnot. So there's just like a very big variability in terms of where companies are at in their maturity journey.
There's lots of complexity. Tim, what's your view from the world of wealth advice? I mean, I know you guys also released a paper, I think, on this recently as well, which I had a look at. I thought it was really good. But yeah, what's your thoughts on that, bridging that gulf from generative to agentic?
I think to your point, I think if we look at to date, we've seen people looking to find often kind of internal efficiencies with workflows. And I think that's tied to, I think what Dimitri was touching on, which is tied to like finding meaningful use cases. But I think there's this aspect here or dimension here of risk. So finding something where there's a valuable use case that people have the kind of appetite for. And I guess the thing which is one of the things that's quite interesting is beginning to kind of look at how actual end users and customers interact with these services. And obviously, Dimitri's doing some really interesting work in this space. And I think there's question marks around, what are the right use cases for this? So we're beginning to see people dip their toes with customer-facing experiences, which is quite exciting. And in the advice world specifically, I think that looks like there's some very lower risk things you can do. So, for example, non-advice, non-guidance, help people explore goals. For example, like what is it that they're trying to achieve with their finances? You can help them understand their goals. You can help them describe kind of financial products to them that provide information. So that's super cool. And then obviously you can kind of take like key self-serve actions, right? So if you're talking about like things you want to do, again, I think some of the stuff we're seeing in market, especially with Dimitri's work, is looking really exciting on that front. I think where it's going in future with stuff around providing guidance and providing advice. So for the audience listening and for people to understand in terms of like levels of risk, if you get to a place of giving fully automated, holistic financial advice, that's more risky than giving guidance, and that's more risky than giving information. So I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. People beginning to dip their toes, taking key actions and looking at, agentic systems through that lens at the moment.
The way I think about it is we're kind of coming out of a period that I would define as agent washing. It's like everything is suddenly going from being AI enabled to being agentic, but it's actually not. A bulk of what we're hearing in the market or as stories or as research reports and news articles and blogs is essentially glorified automation. So it's what AI used to do with a little bit more perhaps autonomy, but not really truly, a little bit more kind of sophistication in the prompts and independence, more reasoning, but it's not really truly agentic. Whereas there are some spaces like Dimitri and Tim mentioned, where it is truly coming to its own, and like customer service, etc., is an area there. And I'm now really excited to see how that evolves. There are banks like RBC, like JP Morgan, like BNY, for example, who are kind of doing truly agentic adoption, but I still think it is limited to spaces like customer engagement, like individual productivity, like perhaps some search functions, which then enable the first two.
Yeah. And what would you all say are the barriers? I mean, maybe just to summarize, we've talked about risk barriers as well, right? So there's a regulatory risk. Aditi, you've mentioned, getting the back office systems working and all of that. Are there also barriers in some of these models as well? I mean, I know there has been some, there is quite a lot of controversy around there about the AGI debate, how much can these, foundational models scale in their reasoning? So some of our listeners may have read maybe a summary of Apple's latest paper, which I think is very interesting, which basically says that, these models will not scale in reasoning. They're not going to be hyper intelligent. That's never going to happen. It's a big kind of debate, and I sometimes, as just someone watching and listening this, I find it very difficult to understand, to filter through the signals in the noise here. Like what is actually required from the technology in order for an agent to fly and for it to work? And, Dimitri, maybe it's a question for you. I mean, do you see that the models that you're using, for example, are able to do some of those more foundational, agentic use cases, or is it actually no, there's still more work that needs to happen?
Yeah, that's actually a great question because kind of every company is grappling with this. The example that I was always making is like, we hear from examples where the new SLM models are performing at PhD level. Yet, if you look at the seemingly very simple use case of customer support, it's still not good enough for that. So somehow those two things don't align, right? So you have PhD level models, but a simple use case, and it still doesn't work. But the reason is not because the models are bad. The reason is because human brains can do a lot more than just LLM models. So LLM models may be one reasoning element of what the human brain can do, but humans can kind of observe, learn from their mistakes. They kind of have memory and concept, and they can save those things, or like memorize, I guess, in human terms. And I think those modules of the brain is what's missing to have really good, robust applications. So I'm going to make an example from customer support area. Like if you hire a human into that space, they will come in and they will observe more senior people. They will read conversations. They will go through some onboarding, and they will build out a map of the company, of the processes, of the product inside their head. And this capability of doing that is actually not captured by LLMs. LLMs play an important role in reasoning about what to learn and how to learn, what to memorize. But fundamentally, there are lots of those building blocks that are missing. And I think companies that are doing well in that space are essentially building those building blocks around LLMs.
That's so interesting. I mean, Aditi, are you seeing some like use cases over the horizon over and above customer service? Or is it kind of customer service is the area where
No, I think there are definitely tons of use cases.
Yeah.
It goes back to Dimitri's point. I think a very simplistic way of framing that gap is effectively current LLMs or GenAI can't really read the room. So they don't understand the context. They don't understand the environment. They don't understand those nuances that are a combination of environment, previous customer data, or again, like previous organizational and market data and current interaction, and they can't really bring it together as intuitively as a human being can. That is stopping further rollout, obviously, in addition to everything we spoke about in terms of data silos and like infrastructure and APIs and connectivity. However, in regards to those use cases, I think there are still significant areas within the financial services space and even just banking, not even wider FS, but even within banking, where there are a lot of use cases that are still relatively instructable. Again, to go back to the example Dimitri gave, if I were to hire a new employee, I could have a graduate or an analyst or an associate come up to speed very quickly on processes and functions like trade reconciliation, like fraud detection, like optimal overnight liquidity management, for example. There is a process of doing it. There is a logical framework that you can explain to somebody, which still requires some tweaking, some adaptation, some on-the-fly decision-making, but it is still a framework that can be explained. And I think those are the use cases that should be next in line for agentic automation, following kind of customer engagement as the first step.
Yeah, and I imagine, Tim, in your world of advice, it's a similar thing, right? That delta between an LLM that can, I don't know, understand an intent or summarize a conversation in guidance, scaling into advice, I guess becomes, I suppose, to paraphrase what Dimitri and Aditi are both saying, is kind of engineering, right? It's all of the stuff that sits around the LLM required to make it work.
Yeah, sure. I think there were two immediate words that are being, or two concepts that are being spoken about. Use cases, really important to focus around, and then what you said yourself, David, around intent capture. So we're certainly looking at this in terms of, can we capture the intent of what someone's doing, and then if we have a clear idea of distinct use cases that we're seeing commonly, how do we make sure that we build around those use cases? And then in terms of tool usage, I mean, this is a really interesting point around financial intelligence, LLMs, origination of financial advice. So when I say origination, we care where the advice comes from. And at Multiply, we're taking very much an opinion of we want the advice to originate from our systems and then the LLM to use that. So hence the agentic usage of Multiply's advice engine, risk engine, and modeling tools. But yeah, certainly like in terms of like, that's kind of the architecture around, that's how we're currently architecting the system, where we think about focused use case, where as Aditi describes, like we can kind of look at making sure we can like evaluate performance around the use case rather than approaching it as this kind of catch-all, oh, this LLM is going to give you total holistic financial advice. That's not the approach that we're taking. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's a strong risk aspect to that as well. I mean, Dimitri, I'd like to maybe just deep dive on risk a little bit, because, you know, you're deploying your service into banks. You know, customer service is answering, you know, personalized information, all of that kind of stuff. How are you thinking about complying to regulations in an agentic world where it's taking action? Yeah. What are some of the pitfalls?
It's actually fascinating. And I mean, the space is still evolving very quickly. But I would say most like traditional legacy banks, they're still, from what I'm seeing at least, 1 to 2 years out from deploying fully autonomous AI agents into critical customer-facing applications, right? So all banks currently are typically at the stage where they use copilots to kind of help their employees to do certain processes, to know how to reply correctly, and so on. So it's certainly a process that is quickly evolving. But the key thing of where I see between companies which progress quicker versus not is there's some companies who treat those new types of systems almost like a human brain, right? So they're essentially saying, okay, if we can prove that this human brain or this system can operate at a higher quality, higher customer satisfaction, fraction of a cost, then we can essentially say it's better for the customer, it's better outcomes for the regulator, it's better for the company. And we can prove that that system is better than whatever there exists right now, and we can apply the same standard to it like we apply to human teams. So that's one camp. And those companies typically, if they can make that argument internally, they can typically prove with the help of companies like ours that yes, it is possible to perform better than the human teams. And that's one route. And then there are companies who are still in the mindset, this is a software and we need to test it how we test software. And so they're trying to test, essentially write tests, and like they're still stuck in this traditional software mindset, and they can't overcome the fact that it's a non-deterministic system, that you will not be able to test it fully, because like the way the customer conversation can evolve is like in billion different ways, and you just can't test every single pass of it. And you kind of need to have this mindset, okay, it's like a human brain, and that's why you need to test it also like this, rather than a traditional software. You just write a bunch of tests and are 100% sure that it's going to work. And that's what I'm seeing in terms of two types of companies and how they think about it.
I almost think that's one of the biggest blockers to large-scale agentic adoption across the industry, and not just FS, it could be any industry, because I think we are still stuck in such incorrect ways of evaluating this technology and even evaluating the outcomes of this technology. It's like we're still stuck in the old ways of saying, am I going to save cost? Am I going to reduce cycle time? It's what cycle time? You might have a completely different process from what you had before. It's like somebody says, well, I've decided to sell my Ford Fiesta and buy a Ferrari, but I go into the showroom and ask them, well, how many gallons does it take? Like, how many miles do I get per gallon? And it is such a bad way of looking at this. Like, we need to completely redefine those frameworks. We need to completely define what the objectives are that we are solving for, and then build the metrics, the monitoring processes, and the governance that flows back from those outcomes, as opposed to just like existing systems on steroids. So, but I completely agree with that, Dimitri. Huge bugbear for me.
But it's so interesting because it sounds like there are no frameworks. They just don't, like, no one knows how to think about this. I mean, is it the case that there needs to be a universally agreed way of, Dimitri?
In a way, we can assess humans, like every company does it, right? So if you have, let's say, people performing operational work, you still want to know that they're doing a good job. And typically what you would have is internal quality assurance functions where you review the work and you assess it based on specific criteria. Is it correct? Is it process compliant? Does it kind of capture all the regulatory requirements? So that's the process, right? So, and we know that, okay, some humans are doing a good job and some are not. And we're essentially saying you need to apply a very similar mindset here, because essentially what you're having here is an intelligence, and you try to control that intelligence, but ultimately it will also make mistakes, similar to how humans do it.
Yes, and Tim, you know, your industry is very, very, I don't know, human, right? This is human-to-human advice. How are you seeing, like, your industry and wealth advisors like almost like kind of react to this tech coming on down the line? Is there an embracing of it? Is there a sense that we need to think about this as a productivity lens, or are you also seeing that disconnect that Dimitri and Aditi are showing?
So when our technology is being applied in the context of human advice firms, I think one thing that we've certainly learned over time is to there's definitely a piece of education to be done. I mean, Dimitri and Aditi described kind of how do you benchmark and evaluate performance in this way. And I think the classic thing we'd hear would be, something from a compliance team along the lines of, "Oh, show us every possible permutation output," and obviously you end up in a kind of a philosophical place of saying, well, actually, I'll be giving you sort of like infinite set of potential results, with kind of continuous kind of differences between different kind of cases. But we've kind of we made sure to be quite opinionated, to turn up with like a set of kind of test cases, and obviously building out evals, educating the teams involved. Ideally cross-functional teams, so making sure that there's the correct representation across the business, senior stakeholders as well involved. And yeah, I think there's an education piece on kind of what to expect and get people aligned, because I think in the earlier days, we certainly kind of ran into challenges when a compliance team might make a kind of an old traditional request, and then we had to try and kind of meet that request in a way that didn't really work for anybody. So certainly turning up with an opinion, educating a team, I think is the way forward.
I think you said there's no framework. I think there is actually a framework, but that framework is evolving as a new one that didn't exist before. So as Tim was talking, they are eval sets, and they're all kind of various ways of kind of rolling out quick, slowly, a limited rollout, or like doing offline validation. Red teaming is a very popular approach, but all those techniques are kind of evolving and new, and so it's an emerging framework. But the kind of the fundamental principle still applies. You kind of more comparing it to humans rather than to traditional software. So that's the difference.
Awesome. And on that note, we're going to take a quick pause here for a quick break. And coming up, we'll dig deeper into agentic AI, and in particular, some real-life examples from Gradient Labs. It's all coming up after this super quick break, so don't go anywhere.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love, starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's vanta.com/insider. Welcome back to FinTech Insider Insights, where we've been looking at where we are with agentic AI in the financial services industry. Now, we want to take a look at what needs to happen to make agentic AI truly valuable for customers and institutions alike, and take a closer look at some real-life examples. So, Dimitri, we're going to come to you, and I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about Otto and why it's different to AI agents. So, tell us a little bit about what is Otto?
Yeah. Otto is an AI agent, well, first of all, but it's purposefully built for financial institutions. And so what this means is that we could really tune it to the use cases that would apply to typical banks, lending institutions, savings, and so on. And that kind of really allowed us to build an exceptional product which kind of performs across different areas. So just to give you like very few examples of how it actually outperforms some of the other AI agents, is for all the use cases where we deployed it across all our customers, we actually have a better customer satisfaction score, CSAT, than the average human team in those companies, right? So we can almost say, come in the company, say, we can guarantee you that we can create better customer outcomes and better customer results for you. And what I actually found out last week, which just blew my mind, is that for 40% of our clients, Otto's CSAT is actually better than the best human on the team. So I'm going to pause there, right? So essentially I can...
That's scary.
it's scary, right? And so I can actually go to some clients. It's for 40%, so it's not for everyone. So I can't unfortunately promise it to everyone. But I can say it's like, look, imagine your best customer support rep and cloning them 100 times in an instant. That's how good you can make your customer experience in your company. And that's obviously a very attractive proposition for anyone. And that's only possible because we've essentially optimized it completely for financial services. Another thing that makes it special is that we're essentially saying, look, banks and financial institutions are different in a way that obviously you have a very, very high compliance and risk bar. And you kind of need to prove that you can actually operate in a more compliant way than your human team. So coming back to our evaluation discussion, our original point was like, unless we can prove that we can build AI that is more compliant with the regulation, with the internal processes than the human teams, it's going to be a very, very difficult job for us to get it adopted by financial institutions. And that was kind of the bar from the beginning, right? So we essentially said, we just need to hit that first before we can kind of actually market it to financial institutions, which we then successfully did. And maybe to mention one last point, and that kind of comes often up when we're being compared to other AI agents in support, for example, but from more kind of horizontal players. Financial services are quite different in a sense. If you want to improve customer experience, you need to care about a lot more than just frontline support. Frontline support is typically maybe 20% of the customer experience in financial services. And the vast majority of it is driven by all kinds of specialist support and back office operations and things like that. So for example, if you contact your bank and said, hey, my payment was declined, it can be really a multitude of things. Like, I don't know, maybe your KYC documents need to be reviewed. Maybe your account is suspended. Maybe your payment needs to be reviewed for money laundering or whatnot. And so we essentially said, look, for us to really deliver exceptional customer experiences, we need to care about that part of the journey as well. We can't just care about frontline support, which is mostly relevant for most other industries, but for financial services, we also need to care about everything that is underneath that surface of the iceberg. And so we essentially focus on back office operations and specialist support and frontline support. And that's how Otto is different.
And I guess what that means is that you have to think about integrations, right? You have to think about integrating with all of these other systems, whether they're CRMs, whether they're kind of KYC systems and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, how does that process work, right? Because that I guess is where things can get super complicated with how you just do those integrations. But also that is another use case for agentic AI in that, like, you know, it can stitch together some of these very complex back office processes, because that's where the gold is, right? As you say, Dimitri.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are like two messages here. Also, I think on one side, like certain systems are very easy to integrate. Like, for example, by default, we integrate on top of Zendesk, Salesforce, Intercom. And so it's usually just 1 to 2 clicks integration points. And it's like out of the box, you get quite a lot of value from it. But then there will be a whole category of more bespoke legacy system back office integrations, which you can't just offer very easily out of the box. But the good message here is that if a company believes in agentic AI's future, and most of the companies do, then they will need to expose those data points eventually to some provider or to some system internally, right? So it doesn't matter whether they're building or buying. It kind of doesn't matter because you need to have access to those data points. And so in a way, our selling point here is much easier. Like, okay, you don't need to do it for us, but even if you build it in-house, you still need to expose those data points. So that's the work that you need to do anyways, and you might as well just start today. So yeah, that's my pragmatic approach on integrations, I guess.
Yeah, and this is where we can bring in, you know, other providers, for example, like, I don't know, Instabase and Multiply. And this is also when we begin to talk about agents speaking to agents. So Aditi, for example, I don't know, your document processing, the ability to extract information from unstructured data that a customer service agent can then pick up and deliver that information to you can almost just kind of see where this ecosystem is going. But like, Aditi, how do you think about, I don't know, almost curating all of these agents and seeing the services that you guys provide, for example, at Instabase as a part of this kind of constellation of other services?
I think that is by far the single most interesting question and also field of development that we'll see in this sector. It is that orchestration of multi-agent systems and how you optimize for that. So as of now, what we're seeing happening is agents are quite specialized and quite focused. It's almost like you have kind of islands of automation and islands of agency that are working across the organization. However, for it to be like a truly agentic or AI native organization, you're going to have to architect your entire tech stack and your entire people stack to match that. Now, what that means is you have a number of decisions to make at every point. Do you have centralized agents who only interact with every signal system through APIs like Dimitri just mentioned? Or do you then say, well, actually, I want Salesforce to keep running its own agents inside Salesforce, and I want Zendex to run its own agents inside Zendex, but then I will have this one manager agent who is effectively going to just give instructions and delegate to them. Then that's the layer of execution. How do you solve the same problem for the layer of data? Do you say, I'm going to pull up all of this data from all of these agents to a centralized layer, which then gets operated on by external applications? Or do I then say data will stay federated, live within each own system with its own access controls and like permissioning rights, and only get sent either encrypted or on a need-to-know basis to that master agent who is like the master of puppets? We don't have answers yet because we've not seen that scale of adoption and that scale of implementation. What we are specifically seeing at Instabase is that this is still being catered for at a process level. There are very few organizations out there, and actually JP Morgan is a good example, who are moving towards an AI organization structure where there is a centralized entity, and this could almost be an AI center of excellence or some kind of horizontal group-wide entity that is creating the foundation of data and the infrastructure to be able to build and deploy these agents. And then you do have federated pods almost, which are either business lines or use cases or systems that are then being orchestrated by that centralized entity. And that seems to be the most successful model, at least based on where the technology capability is at the moment.
Wow. It's so interesting. And it's so early. It's just so early, as you say. There's so few examples of this kind of orchestration. I mean,
Exactly.
Tim, how are you thinking about, stuff like MCPs and agent talking to agent in your product development roadmap? Is that something you're seeing demand for?
Yes, certainly. But I think, David, I might just quickly talk to data access and then multi-agent systems and then talk MCP, if that's okay, because I'll give you the specific kind of multiply take. But data access, Dimitri was just describing how important that is in terms of getting these data points. When it comes to our kind of efficiency offering for human advice firms, we've got a partnership with the number one CRM provider for advice firms called IntelliFlow. So we're launching IntelliFlow IQ soon. And that, to this exact theme, is a huge piece for us, which is giving us, making us privy to a level of data, which means that our services can really offer, the highest level of performance in the market. So that's super exciting. And then for the scaled advice side of things, I think, again, this data access theme, if we're working with fintechs, they tend to organizationally and, in terms of what they are, be very good at provisioning data. So they're very good at provisioning services to enable that data access. And so I think it's just worth just kind of highlighting thematically like that data access, how important that data access piece is. And obviously what our kind of play is currently. And I think Aditi is right in terms of it's a developing space. So it's super interesting to see how this kind of shakes out in future. With regards to multi-agent systems, so agent-to-agent type communication, the only thing that came to my mind was we've had a lot of joy with, there's lots of tech stacks out there, but I just thought I'd say that we've had a lot of joy with the Google Agent Builder in terms of orchestration. There's this kind of concept of like an orchestrating agent that can then call upon specific agents. And that's been really cool to use actually in terms of seeing how that system works, and there's guardrails and lots of good stuff in that stack that we've been playing with. But yeah, I think that concept, because we mentioned use cases earlier, it's back to the idea of you can have something built around the use case and have the orchestrator kind of pull in the relevant agents that are built for a particular use case. So I think that's been really quite exciting. And then, yeah, in terms of MCP, it's a standard, right? And I think the great thing about MCP is, at least what I'm going to say, is it's recognized. People understand what people mean by it, right? Whether it's going to be the standard into the future is I think remains to be seen. But I think when you talk about MCP, people understand agentic usage, and in terms of like a good place to start when you're communicating to people what this thing is and provisioning of your services. If you say MCP, then certainly that's a good way to kind of communicate with people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the API of the agent world, and at least that gets everybody to kind of coalesce around it. Yeah,
I mean, they've certainly capitalized on. I think people have said MCP enough. I wonder if there will be a different standard or name. I don't know if Dimitri or DC have got a take on that. I'd be interested to hear what they have to say.
Come up with your own one. Dimitri, I have we have to go back to where you are with Otto and what this means for the future, right? Because I think you said that earlier on in the pod that this is going to be scaling significantly over the course of the next 2 years, right? Particularly the wider agent use case. How do you handle the workforce situation here, right? Because a lot of what we're talking about here is benchmarking agentic AI against human workforces, right? This is the crucial difference, I think, that we've all been saying. It's not about software testing, it's about human testing almost. And as this scales into the kind of 98%, for example, case handling that a human is, when you're working with a bank, how are you seeing banks think about their workforces and how they interact with agents? Have you seen any kind of interesting chat going on in that area?
Yeah, I think for traditional banks, it's probably a bit too early to think about that problem, because so far they're mostly thinking about it from a co-piloting perspective, right? So there's AI that helps the humans to do their jobs better, faster, and so on. I do think it will become an important point, though, in a couple of years' time, where if the premise is true and we scale, in general, the industry scales the current technology, and actually you can automate 80 to 90% of the current manual repetitive work. So I think the roles of humans in those organizations will shift. So for example, we have seen with our current clients, the roles that manage and instruct the agent and test the agent and kind of QA the agent are a lot more important here. And obviously they have also much higher leverage. So if you give the agent wrong knowledge, suddenly it says that wrong thing 1,000 times over. So it's really kind of the cost of making mistakes becomes much higher. And so you really want to have qualified people kind of running and operating those systems. So the roles will really evolve, but to some degree, some of them will still stay, because I believe the most complex cases will still be handled by humans, even over the next 2-3 years.
There are some complex cases you just want that have to be handled by a human that, the regulator will insist on, and I'm sure customers will also insist on, right? And that makes a lot
100%,
of sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Aditi, what do you think about the next, say 2 to 5 years, looking in your crystal ball? Is it a case of, workforce replacement, or is it like incremental changes to roles, as Dimitri was saying?
I think it will be a little bit of both. And this is almost kind of a fascinating example of that concept of how we think is reflected in our language, and our language reflects how we, influences how we think. We have gone from, like Dimitri mentioned, automation to co-pilots to agents. Bank of New York now has a bunch of so-called digital workers who will have their own email addresses and their own logins and their own access to the bank's internal systems. That mindset shift is happening. That shift is happening in language. And I'm expecting some of that shift to indeed happen in actual execution of processes. So I think in terms of whether or not that will have impact on the workforce, on jobs, yes, absolutely, it will. Whether or not we're going to turn into fully agentic financial systems, no. definitely not. And a part of this is hope or wish. A part of this is kind of a bit of prediction. But it is, again, an industry based on trust. And trust is being built by by empathy, by explainability, by transparency, by being able to change in a way that has not been done before or not written in a rule book. That's something an LLM cannot learn from, and therefore an agent cannot adapt to. So with almost thankfully, in my personal opinion, but for better or for worse, we are still some ways away from all of that turning completely autonomous. And therefore, I think crystal ball gazing, we will definitely see an increase of agentic adoption. We will definitely see an increase in autonomy. That autonomy will filter across existing use cases of engagement to multiple other use cases, including like in the risk management space and all sorts of different spaces. But it will still need to be governed, monitored, and almost policed by a set of human beings. And long may that last.
Yeah, and as you say, that's a good thing. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is making, better customer experiences, like, the stuff that Dimitri and Gradient Labs are doing. No, I totally echo that, Aditi. Tim, if you were to gaze into that crystal ball, what do you see happening most in the next few years for agentic?
Yeah, so I think we spoke earlier about this idea of a financial advice gap, and we speak about financial intelligence coming to mass consumers over time. And I think financial intelligence is going to come to the masses in that period, and that looks like doing the right thing with your money, and to get the things that a customer wants, and to retire well, and all that good stuff. So opening products, moving money. I think there's this kind of almost like a little bit of a kind of classic disruption play here, where people talk about, humans certainly going to be required for complex cases, complex financial advice cases. You're going to need humans, and there's a huge amount of value in having a human to turn to and talk to about your finances. I certainly think that's where it's going to be. But I think there is a piece here which is like very simple cases that we're going to serve with automated services for simple financial advice cases. If you play it out logically, there's going to be increasing complexity over time. So like you're going to probably see the mid-market get served by this technology in that kind of time period that we're talking about. So increasing complexity, which is super interesting. And then from like the agentic specific context, I think, one of the ways that financial services or financial advice in the past has been kind of quite painful. It's been stuff like having to fill in a lot of forms, right? Or connecting lots of different accounts. I think there's something here around like, and being able to get that total awareness or that view of a customer, like those that are willing to kind of sign up to it and consent, I think will probably have a closer to live full view of customers. And then you can have this stuff running in the background where you can see services doing things on your behalf based on your money, based on advice, or notifying you about it, wanting to do a thing and asking for your permission. And I think maybe there's this graduated level in the particular, obviously this window of 2 to 5 years is probably starting off with doing things that are reversible, so it's like preparing a report for you or moving money into a product that you can take the money out of. So there's no penalties, right? Or there's no kind of constraints on that product. Whereas, in the future, there's big kind of, harder to reverse decisions. I think that's kind of further out to the right. And if there's more complexity, I think that's further out to the right. But it's certainly quite exciting. The idea that what I certainly have, what I think the future will be is this level of intelligence provisioned to people that has never been provisioned before, and in a way that is done in a way that works for regulators as well. So a record of advice given, all the reasoning behind it recorded appropriately, and obviously people still being able to benefit from these LLM systems and agentic systems whilst keeping the regulators happy.
So sort of democratizing advice there, which is a good one. Dimitri, I want to come to you for the final word. If you're a bank leader listening to this, then let's say you're in a big incumbent bank, right? You've got like data availability and access is not so great. You've got quite a lot of issues. What's that one thing you should do tomorrow to not fall behind?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's a 0 to 1 problem, right? So we have a completely new technology out there, and everyone's trying to figure out how to use it. So my biggest advice would be like, pick a use case. Don't obsess for too long what exactly, but sufficiently high risk and kind of valuable use case, and try to figure out how would you ever deploy it into production, right? Because on the way there, you will learn a bunch of valuable lessons, like how to even to talk about the risks, how to assess them, what does compliance team needs, and kind of every function internally, whether it's AT, product, risk, compliance, they need to figure out their ways of thinking about it, their frameworks, and that journey just takes ages and ages, right? So, and I think you kind of need to create that first blueprint, and that's the hardest thing to do, like this first use case from 0 to 1. But once you have done this, I think the next ones will be significantly simpler. So it almost doesn't matter what it is, and it almost doesn't matter whether you build it or you buy it, because if you work with a vendor, you need to do a similar type of due diligence and risk management. So really kind of rush to get the first use case out there safely, and that will provide you a blueprint of how you can scale it to a much better, much more impactful use cases later.
Amazing. It's great advice. Thanks, Dimitri. And on that note, that wraps up today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining me, all of you. Where can people find out more about you all? Dimitri?
Yes, people can find me on LinkedIn. I post quite a lot about automation in general. Not surprising.
Yeah, definitely not surprising. And Aditi?
Likewise, please message me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk more about AI and agents.
Amazing. And Tim?
Yes, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find our website at multiply.ai. And we are hiring engineers at the moment. So if you've made it this far and you're interested in a role at Multiply in the technical team, you can email jobs@multiply.ai.
Epic. And you can find me on LinkedIn at DavidBG. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make it better and helps others find the show. As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or FinTech Insider or email podcasts@11fs.com. Thanks very much and goodbye.
"11FS Pulse" is where financial services comes to benchmark its customer experiences. Home to over 17,000 hand-picked user journeys from over 800 brands, Pulse showcases best-in-class UX that covers everything from onboarding and payments to investments and business banking. By using Pulse, Monzo was able to cut its product research phase by 90%, and they're not doing too bad. Want to see what all the fuss is about? Book your demo with our in-house experts today at 11fs.com/pulse.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's VANTA.com/insider.